Good evening, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes, and tonight we continue with our new book, The Phantom of the Opera. And we begin tonight with Chapter 3, The Mysterious Reason. During this time, the farewell ceremony was taking place. I have already said that this magnificent function was being given on the occasion of the retirement of Monsieur Debonair and Monsieur Polonais, who had determined to die game, as we say nowadays. They had been assisted in the realization of their ideal, though melancholy, program by all that counted in the social and artistic world of Paris. All these people met after the performance in the foyer of the ballet, where Sorelli waited for the arrival of the retiring managers with a glass of champagne in her hand and a little prepared speech at the tip of her tongue. Behind her, the members of the corps de ballet, young and old, discussed the events of the day in whispers or exchanged discreet signals with their friends, a noisy crowd of whom surrounded the super tables arranged along the slanting floor. A few of the dancers had already changed into ordinary dress, but most of them wore their skirts of gossamer gauze, and all had thought it the right thing to put on a special face for the occasion. All, that is, except for little Jeanne, whose 15 summers' happy age seemed already to have forgotten the ghost and the death of Joseph Buquet. She never ceased to laugh and chatter, to hop about and play practical jokes until Messieurs Debonair and Polonais appeared on the steps of the foyer, when she was severely called out to order by the impatient Sorelli. Everybody remarked that the retiring managers looked cheerful, as is the Paris way. None will ever be a true Parisian who has not learned to wear a mask of gaiety over his sorrows and one of sadness, boredom or indifference over his inward joy. You know that one of your friends is in trouble. Do not try to console him. He will tell you he is already comforted. But should he have met with good fortune, be careful how you congratulate him. He thinks it is so natural that he is surprised that you should speak of it. In Paris, our lives are one masked ball, and the foyer of the ballet is the last place in which two men, so knowing as Monsieur Debonair and Monsieur Polonais, would have made the mistake of betraying their grief, however genuine it might be. And they were already smiling rather too broadly upon Sorelli, who had begun to recite her speech, when an exclamation from that little madcap of Jeanne broke the smile of the managers so brutally that the expression of distress and dismay that lay beneath it became apparent to all eyes. "The opera ghost!" Jeanne yelled these words in a tone of unspeakable terror, and her finger pointed among the crowd of dandies to face so pallid, so lugubrious, and so ugly, with two such deep black cavities under the straddling eyebrows, that the death's head in question immediately scored a huge success. "The opera ghost! The opera ghost!" Everybody laughed and pushed his neighbor, and wanted to offer the opera ghost a drink, but he was gone. He had slipped through the crowd, and the others vainly hunted for him, while two old gentlemen tried to calm little Jeanne, and while little Giry stood screaming like a peacock. Sorelli was furious. She had not been able to finish her speech. The managers had kissed her, thanked her, and run away as fast as the ghost himself. No one was surprised at this, for it was known that they were to go through the same ceremony on the floor above in the foyer of the singers, and that finally they were themselves to receive their personal friends for the last time in the great lobby outside the manager's office, where a regular supper would be served. Here they found the new managers, Monsieur Armand Montcharin and Monsieur Firmin Richard, whom they hardly knew. Nevertheless, they were lavish in protestations of friendship, and received 1,000 flattering compliments in reply, so that those of the guests who had feared that they had a rather tedious evening in store for them, at once put on brighter faces. The supper was almost gay, and a particularly clever speech of the representative of the government, mingling the glories of the past with the successes of the future, caused the greatest cordiality to prevail. The retiring managers had already handed over their successors the two tiny master keys which opened all the doors, thousands of doors of the opera house, and those little keys, the object of general curiosity, were being passed from hand to hand, when the attention of some of the guests was diverted by their discovery, at the end of the table, of that strange, wan, fantastic face, with the hollow eyes, which had already appeared in the foyer of the ballet, and had been greeted by little Jammes, exclaimed, "The opera ghost!" There sat the ghost, as natural as could be, except that he neither ate nor drank. Those who began by looking at him with a smile ended by turning away their heads, for the sight of him at once provoked the most funereal thoughts. No one repeated the joke of the foyer. No one exclaimed, "There's the opera ghost." He himself did not speak a word, and his various neighbors could not have stated at what precise moment he had sat down between them, but everyone felt that if the dead did ever come and sit at the table of the living, they could not cut a more ghastly figure. The friends of Firmin Richard and Armand Moncharmin thought that this lean and skinny guest was an acquaintance of Debonnaise or Poligny, while Debonnaise and Poligny's friends believed that the cadaverous individual belonged to Firmin Richard or Armand Moncharmin's party. The result was that no request was made for an explanation, no unpleasant remark, no joke in bad taste, which might have offended the visitor from the tomb. A few of those present, who knew the story of the ghost and the description of him given by the chief scene shifter, they did not know of Joseph Buquet's death, thought in their own minds that the man at the end of the table might easily have passed for him, and yet, according to the story, the ghost had no nose, and the person in question had one. But Monsieur Moncharmin declares in his memoirs that the guest's nose was transparent, long, thin, and transparent, are his exact words. I, for my part, will add that this might very well apply to a false nose. Monsieur Moncharmin may have taken for transparency what was only shininess. Everybody knows that orthopedic science provides beautiful false noses for those who have lost their noses naturally or as a result of an operation. Did the ghost really take a seat at the manager's supper table that night, uninvited? And can we be sure that the figure was that of the opera ghost himself? Who would venture to assert as much? I mention the incident not because I wish for a second to make the reader believe, or even try to make him believe, that the ghost was capable of such a sublime piece of impudence, but because, after all, the thing is possible. Monsieur Armand Moncharmin, in chapter 11 of his memoirs, says, "When I think of this first evening, I cannot separate the secret confided to us by Messieurs Debonnaise and Poligny in their office from the presence at our supper of that ghostly person whom none of us knew." What happened was this. Messieurs Debonnaise and Poligny, sitting at the center of the table, had not seen the man with the death's head. Suddenly he began to speak. "The ballet girls are right," he said. "The death of that poor Buquet is perhaps not so natural as people think." Debonnaise and Poligny gave a start. "Is Buquet dead?" they cried. "Yes," replied the man, or the shadow of a man, quietly. "He was found this evening hanging in the third cellar between a farmhouse and a scene from the Rue de Lahore." The two managers, or rather ex-managers, at once rose and stared strangely at the speaker. They were more excited than they need have been. That is to say, more excited than anyone need be by the announcement of the suicide of a chief scene shifter. They looked at each other. They had both turned whiter than the tablecloth. At last, Debonair made a sign to Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin. Poligny muttered a few words of excuse to the guests, and all four went into the manager's office. I leave Monsieur Moncharmin to complete the story in his memoirs. He says, Messieurs Debonair and Poligny seemed to grow more and more excited, and they appeared to have something very difficult to tell us. First, they asked us if we knew the man, sitting at the end of the table, who had told them of the deaths of Joseph Buquet, and when we answered in the negative, they looked still more concerned. They took master keys from our hands, stared at them for a moment, and advised us to have new locks made, with the greatest secrecy for the rooms, closets, and presses that we might wish to have hermetically closed. They said this so funnily that we began to laugh and to ask if there were thieves at the opera. They replied that there was something worse, which was the ghost. He began to laugh again, feeling sure that they were indulging in some joke that was intended to crown our little entertainment. Then, at their request, we became serious, resolving to humor them and to enter into the spirit of the game. They told us that they never would have spoken to us of the ghost if they had not received formal orders from the ghost himself to ask us to be pleasant to him or to grant any request that he might make. However, in their relief at leaving a domain where that tyrannical shade held sway, they had hesitated until the last moment to tell us the curious story, which our skeptical minds were certainly not prepared to entertain. But the announcement of the death of Joseph Buquet had served them as a brutal reminder that, whenever they had disregarded the ghost's wishes, some fantastic or disastrous event had brought them to a sense of their dependence. During these unexpected utterances, made in a tone of the most secret and important confidence, I looked at Richard. Richard, in his student days, had acquired a great reputation for practical joking, and he seemed to relish the dish which was being served up to him in his turn. He did not miss a morsel of it, though the seasoning was a little gruesome because of the death of Buquet. He nodded his head sadly while the others spoke, and his features assumed the air of a man who bitterly regretted having taken over the opera, now that he knew that there was a ghost mixed up in the business. I could not think of nothing better than to give him a servile imitation of this attitude of despair. However, in spite of all our efforts, we could not, at the finish, help bursting out laughing in the faces of Messieurs Debonair and Poligny, who, seeing us pass straight from the gloomiest state of mind to one of the most insolent merriment, acted as though they thought we had gone mad. The joke became a little tedious, and Richard asked, half seriously and half in jest, "But after all, what does this ghost of yours want?" Monsieur Poligny went to his desk and returned with a copy of a memorandum book. The memorandum book begins with the well-known words saying that the management of the opera shall give the performance of the National Academy of Music the splendor that becomes the first lyric stage in France, and ends with clause 98, which says that the privilege can be withdrawn if the manager infringes on the conditions stipulated in the memorandum book. This is followed by the conditions, which are 4 in number. The copy produced by Monsieur Poligny was written in black ink and exactly similar to that in our possession, except that at the end it contained a paragraph in red ink and in a queer labored handwriting, as though it had been produced by dipping the heads of matches into the ink, and the writing of a child that has never got beyond the downstrokes and has not learned to join its letters. The paragraph ran word for word as follows. Number 5. or if the manager in any month delays for more than a fortnight the payment of the allowance which he shall make to the opera ghost, an allowance of 20,000 francs a month, say 240,000 francs a year. Monsieur Poligny pointed with a hesitating finger to his last clause, which we certainly did not expect. Is this all? Does he not want anything else? Asked Richard, with the greatest coolness. Yes, he does, replied Poligny. And he turned over the pages of the memorandum book until he came to the clause specifying the days on which certain private boxes were to be reserved for the free use of the President of the Republic, the ministers, and so on. At the end of this clause, a line had been added, also in red ink. Box 5 on the grand tier shall be placed at the disposal of the opera ghost for every performance. When we saw this, there was nothing else for us to do but to rise from our chairs, shake our two predecessors warmly by the hand, and congratulate them on thinking of this charming little joke, which proved that the old French sense of humor was never likely to become extinct. Richard added that he now understood why Messieurs Debonnet and Poligny were retiring from the management of the National Academy of Music. Business was impossible with so unreasonable a ghost. Certainly, 240,000 francs are not to be picked up for the asking, said Monsieur Poligny, without moving a muscle of his face. And have you considered what the loss over box 5 meant to us? We did not sell it once, and not only that, but we had to return the subscription. Why? It's awful. We really can't work to keep ghosts. We prefer to go away. Yes, echoed Monsieur Debonnet, we prefer to go away. Let us go. And he stood up. Richard said, but after all, it seems to me that you were much too kind to the ghost. If I had such a troublesome ghost as that, I should not hesitate to have him arrested. But how? Where? They cried in chorus. We have never seen him. But when he comes to his box, we have never seen him in his box. Then sell it. Sell the opera ghost's box? Well, gentlemen, try it. Thereupon we all four left the office. Richard and I had never laughed so much in our lives. Chapter 5. Box 5. Armand Moncharmin wrote such voluminous memoirs during the fairly long period of his co-management that we may ask if he ever found time to attend to the affairs of the opera, otherwise than by telling what went on there. Monsieur Moncharmin did not know a note of music, but he called the Minister of Education and Fine Arts by his Christian name, had dabbled a little in society journalism, and enjoyed a considerable private income. Lastly, he was a charming fellow, and showed that he was not lacking in intelligence, for as soon as he made up his mind to be a sleeping partner in the opera, he selected the best possible active manager and went straight to Firmin Richard. Firmin Richard was a very distinguished composer who had published a number of successful pieces of all kinds, and who liked nearly every form of music and every sort of musician. Clearly, therefore, it was the duty of every sort of musician to like Monsieur Firmin Richard. The only things to be said against him were that he was rather masterful in his ways and endowed with a very hasty temper. The first few days which the partners spent at the opera were given over to the delight of finding themselves the head of so magnificent an enterprise, and they had forgotten all about the curious, fantastic story of the ghost, when an incident occurred that proved to them that the joke, if joke it were, was not over. Monsieur Firmin Richard reached for his office that morning at 11 o'clock. His secretary, Monsieur Remy, showed him half a dozen letters which he had not opened because they were marked private. One of the letters had at once attracted Richard's attention, not only because the envelope was addressed in red ink, but because he seemed to have seen the writing before. He soon remembered that it was the red handwriting in which the memorandum book had been so curiously completed. He recognized the clumsy, childish hand. He opened the letter and read, Dear Monsieur Manager, I am sorry to have to trouble you at a time when you must be so very busy, renewing important engagements, signing fresh ones, and generally displaying your excellent taste. I know what you have done for Carlotta, Sorelli, and Little Jean, and for a few others whose admirable qualities of talent or genius you have suspected. Of course, when I use these words, I do not mean to apply them to La Carlotta, who sings like a squirt, and who ought never to have been allowed to leave the ambassadeurs and Café Joaquin, nor to La Sorelli, who owes her success mainly to the coach builders, nor to Little Jean, who dances like a calf in a field. And I am not speaking of Christine Day either, though her genius is certain, whereas your jealousy prevents you from creating any important part. When all is said, you are free to conduct your little business as you think best, are you not? All the same, I should like to take advantage of the fact that you have not yet turned Christine Day out of doors by hearing her this evening in the part of Sibyl, as that of Margarita has been forbidden to her since her triumph of the other evening, and I will ask you not to dispose of my box today, nor on the following days, for I cannot end this letter without telling you how disagreeably surprised I have been once or twice to hear on arriving at the opera that my box had been sold at the box office by your orders. I did not protest, first because I dislike scandal, and second because I thought that your predecessors, Messieurs Debonnet and Polinet, who were always charming to me, had neglected before leaving to mention my little fads to you. I have now received a reply from those gentlemen to my letter asking for an explanation, and this reply proves that you know all about my memorandum book, and, consequently, that you are treating me with outrageous contempt. If you wish to live in peace, you must not begin by taking away my private box. Believe me to be, dear Mr. Manager, without prejudice to these little observations, your most humble and obedient servant, Opera Ghost. The letter was accompanied by a cutting from the agony column of the Revue Théâtrale, which ran, O.G. There is no excuse for R. and M. We told them and left your memorandum book in their hands. Kind regards. Monsieur Firmin Richard had hardly finished reading this letter when Monsieur Armand Moncharmin entered, carrying one exactly similar. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. They are keeping up the joke, said Monsieur Richard, but I don't call it funny. What does it mean? Asked Monsieur Moncharmin. Do they imagine that because they have been managers of the opera, we are going to let them have a box for an indefinite period? I am not in the mood to let myself be laughed at long, said Firmin Richard. It's harmless enough, observed Armand Moncharmin. What is it they really want? A box for tonight? Monsieur Firmin Richard told his secretary to send box 5 on the grand tier to Messieurs Debonnet and Polinet, if it was not sold. It was not. It was sent off to them. Debonnet lived at the corner of the Rue Scribe and the Boulevard des Capucines. Polinet in the Rue Auber. Ghost's 2 letters had been posted at the Boulevard des Capucines post office, as Moncharmin remarked after examining the envelopes. You see, said Richard. They shrugged their shoulders and regretted that the 2 men of that age should amuse themselves with such childish tricks. They might have been civil for all that, said Moncharmin. Did you notice how they treat us with regard to Carlotta, Sorelli, and little Jean. Well, my dear fellow, these two men are mad with jealousy to think that they went to the expense of an advertisement in the Revue Théâtrale. Have they nothing better to do? By the way, said Moncharmin, they seem to be greatly interested in that little Christine Day. You know as well as I do that she has the reputation of being quite good, said Richard. Reputations are easily obtained, replied Moncharmin. Haven't I a reputation for knowing all about music? And I don't know one key from another. Don't be afraid. You never had that reputation, Richard declared. Thereupon he ordered the artist to be shown in, who, for the last 2 hours, had been walking up and down the outside door with fame and fortune or dismissal, which awaited them. The whole day was spent in discussing, negotiating, signing, or canceling contracts, and the two overlooked managers went to bed early without so much as casting a glance at Box 5 to see whether Monsieur Debonair or Paulinet were enjoying the performance. Next morning, the managers received a card of thanks from the ghost. Dear Mr. Manager, thanks. Charming evening. Day, exquisite. Choruses want waking up. Carlotta, a splendid commonplace instrument. Will write you soon for the 240,000 francs, or 233,424 francs, to be correct. Messieurs Debonair and Paulinet have sent me the 6,575 francs, representing the first 10 days of my allowance for the current year. Their privilege is finished on the evening of the 10th. Regards, Opera Ghost. On the other hand, there was a letter from Monsieur Debonair and Paulinet. Dear gentlemen, we are much obliged for your kind thought of us, but you will easily understand that the prospect of again hearing Faust, pleasant though it is to ex-managers of the opera, cannot make us forget that we have no right to occupy Box 5 on the Grand Tier, which is the exclusive property of him of whom we spoke to you when we went through the memorandum book with you for the last time. See Clause 98, final paragraph. Except, gentlemen, etc. Oh, those fellows are beginning to annoy me, shouted Firmin Richard, snatching up the letter. And that evening Box 5 was sold. The next morning, Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin, on reaching their office, found an inspector's report relating to an accident that had happened the night before in Box 5. I give the essential part of the report. I was obliged to call a municipal guard twice this evening to clear Box 5 on the Grand Tier, once at the beginning and once in the middle of the second act. The occupants, who arrived as the curtain rose on the second act, created a regular scandal by their laughter and their ridiculous observations. There were cries of hush all around them, and the whole house was beginning to protest when the box-keeper came to fetch me. I entered the box and said what I thought necessary. The people did not seem to be in their right mind, and they made stupid remarks. I said that if the noise was repeated, I should be compelled to clear the box. The moment I left, I heard the laughing again, with fresh protests from the house. I returned with a municipal guard, who turned them out. They protested, still laughing, saying that they would not go unless they got their money back. At last they became quiet, and I allowed them to enter the box again. The laughter at once recommenced, and this time I had them turned out permanently. Send for the inspector, said Richard to his secretary, who had already read the report and marked it with a blue pencil. Monsieur Remy, the secretary, had foreseen the order and called the inspector at once. Tell us what happened, said Richard bluntly. The inspector began to splutter and referred to the report. Well, but what were those people laughing at, said Moncharmin. They must have been dining, sir, and seemed more inclined to lark about than to listen to good music. The moment they had entered the box, they came out again and called the box-keeper, who asked them what they wanted. They said, "Look in the box, there's no one there." "Is there?" "No," said the woman. "Well," said they, When we went in, we heard a voice saying that the box was taken. Monsieur Moncharmin could not help smiling as he looked at Monsieur Richard, but Monsieur Richard did not smile. He himself had done too much in the way in his time to not recognize in the inspector's story all the marks of one of those practical jokes which begin by amusing and end by engaging, or actually enraging, the victims. The inspector, to curry favor with Monsieur Moncharmin, who was smiling, thought it best to give a smile too. A most unfortunate smile. Monsieur Richard glared at his subordinate, who thenceforth made it his business to display a face of utter consternation. However, when people arrived, roared Richard, "There was no one in the box, was there?" "Not a soul, sir, not a soul. Nor in the box on the right, nor in the box on the left. Not a soul, sir, I swear. The box-keeper told me often enough, which proves that it is all a joke." "Oh, you agree, do you?" said Richard. "You agree it's a joke, and you think it funny, no doubt." "I think it in very bad taste, sir. And what did the box-keeper say?" "Oh, she said that it was the opera ghost, that's all." And the inspector grinned, but he soon found that he had made a mistake in grinning, for the words had no sooner left his mouth than Monsieur Richard, from gloomy, became furious. "Send for the box-keeper," he shouted. "Send for her this minute, and bring her to me, and turn all those people out." The inspector tried to protest, but Richard closed his mouth with an angry order to hold his tongue. Then, when the wretched man's lips seemed to shut forever, the manager commanded him to open them once more. "Who is this opera ghost?" he snarled. But the inspector was by this time incapable of speaking a word. He managed to convey by a despairing gesture that he knew nothing about it, or rather, that he did not wish to know. "Have you ever seen him? Have you seen the opera ghost?" The inspector, by means of a vigorous shake of the head, denied ever having seen the ghost in question. "Very well," said Monsieur Richard coldly. The inspector's eyes started out of his head, as though to ask why the manager had uttered that ominous "very well." "Because I'm going to settle this account, and the account of anyone who has not seen him," explained the manager, "as he seems to be everywhere. I can't have people telling me that they see him now and then see him nowhere. I like people to work for me when I employ them." Having said this, Monsieur Richard paid no attention to the inspector and discussed various matters of business with his acting manager, who had entered the room meanwhile. The inspector thought he could go, and was gently, oh, so gently, sliding towards the door, when Monsieur Richard nailed the man to the floor with a thundering, "Stay where you are." Mr. Remy had sent for the box-keeper to the Rue de Provence, close to the opera, where she was engaged as a porteress. She soon made her appearance. "What's your name?" Miss Giry." "You know me well enough, sir. I'm the mother of little Giry. Little Meg." "What?" This was said in so rough and solemn a tone that for a moment Monsieur Richard was impressed. He looked at Miss Giry, in her faded shawl, her worn shoes, her old taffeta dress, and dingy bonnet. It was quite evident from the manager's attitude that he either did not know or could not remember having met Miss Giry. Not even little Giry, nor even little Meg. But Mrs. Giry's pride was so great that celebrated box-keeper imagined that everybody knew her. "Never heard of her," the manager declared, "but that's no reason. Mrs. Giry, why shouldn't I ask you what happened last night to make you and the inspector call in the municipal guard?" "I was just wanting to see you, sir, and talk to you about it, so that you mightn't have the same unpleasantness as Messieurs Debonnet and Messieurs Polonais. They wouldn't listen to me either at first. I'm not asking you about all that. I'm asking you about what happened last night." Mrs. Giry turned purple with indignation. Never had she been spoken to like that. She rose as though to go, gathering up the folds of her skirt and waving the feathers of her dingy bonnet with dignity. But, changing her mind, she sat back down and said in a haughty voice, "I'll tell you what happened. The ghost was annoyed again." Thereupon, as Monsieur Richard was on the point of bursting out, Monsieur Moncharmin interfered and conducted the interrogatory, whence it appeared that Mrs. Giry thought it was natural that a voice should be heard to say that a box was taken, when there was nobody in the box. She was unable to explain this phenomena, which was not new to her, except by the intervention of the ghost. Nobody could see the ghost in his box, but everybody could hear him. She had often heard him, and they could believe her, for she always spoke the truth. They could ask Messieurs Debonnet and Messieurs Polonais, and anybody who knew her, and also Monsieur Isidore Sac, who had a leg broken by the ghost. "Indeed," said Moncharmin, interrupting her. "Did the ghost break poor Isidore Sac's leg?" Mrs. Giry opened her eyes with astonishment at such ignorance. However, she consented to enlighten those poor gentlemen, as they seemed to be innocents. The thing had happened in Monsieur Debonnet and Monsieur Polonais' time, also in Box 5, and also during a performance of Faust. Mrs. Giry coughed, cleared her throat. It sounded as though she were preparing to sing the whole of Gounod's Scar, and began. "It was like this, sir. That night, Monsieur Maniera and his lady, the jewelers of the Rue Mogador, were sitting in front of the box, with their great friend, Monsieur Isidore Sac, sitting behind Monsieur Maniera. Mephistopheles was singing. Mrs. Giry here burst into song herself. 'Catarina, while you play at sleeping.' And then Monsieur Maniera heard a voice in his right ear. His wife was on his left, saying, 'Ha ha! Julie's not playing at sleeping.' His wife happened to be called Julie. So Monsieur Maniera turned to the right to see who was talking to him, like that. Nobody was there. He rubs his ear and asks himself if he's dreaming. Then Mephistopheles went on with the serenade. But perhaps I'm boring you, gentlemen. No, go on. You are too good, gentlemen, with a smirk. Well then, Mephistopheles went on with his serenade. Mrs. Giry burst into song again. 'Saint, unclose thy portals, holy, and accord the bliss to mortal bending lowly of a pardon kiss.' And then Monsieur Maniera again hears the voice in his right ear, saying this time, 'Ha ha! Julie wouldn't mind according a kiss to Isidore.' Then he turns round again, but this time to the left, and what do you think he sees? Isidore, who had taken his lady's hand and was covering it with kisses, through the little round place in the glove, like this, gentlemen, rapturously kissing the bit of a palm left bare in the middle of her threadbare gloves. Then they had a lively time between them. Bang, bang! Monsieur Maniera, who was a big and strong person like you, Monsieur Richard, gave 2 blows to Monsieur Isidore Sac, who was a small and weak man like Monsieur Moncharmin, saving his presence. There was a great uproar. People in the house shouted, 'That will do! Stop them! He'll kill them!' Then at last Monsieur Isidore Sac managed to run away." "Then the ghost had not broken his leg?" asked Monsieur Moncharmin, a little vexed that his figure had made so little impression on Mrs. Giry. "He did not break it for him, sir," replied Mrs. Giry haughtily. "He broke it for him on the grand staircase, which he ran down too fast, sir, and it will be long before the poor gentleman will be able to go up it again." "Did the ghost tell you what he said in Monsieur Maniera's right ear?" asked Monsieur Moncharmin, with a gravity which he thought exceedingly humorous. "No, sir, it was Monsieur Maniera himself. So, but you have spoken to the ghost, my good lady." "As I am speaking to you now, my good sir," Mrs. Giry replied. "And when the ghost speaks to you, what does he say?" "Well, he tells me to bring him a footstool." This time Richard burst out laughing, as did Moncharmin and Remy, the secretary. Only the inspector, warned by experience, was careful not to laugh, while Mrs. Giry ventured to adopt an attitude that was positively threatening. Instead of laughing, she cried indignantly, "You'd better do as Monsieur Polonais did, who found out for himself." "Found out about what?" asked Moncharmin, who had never been so much amused in his life. "About the ghost, of course. Look here." She suddenly calmed herself, feeling that this was a solemn moment in her life. "Look here," she repeated. They were playing La Juvie. Monsieur Polonais thought he would watch the performance from the ghost's box. Well, when Leopold cries, "Let us fly," you know, and Elizire stops them and says, "Whither go ye?" Well, Monsieur Polonais, I was watching him from the back of the next box, which was empty. Monsieur Polonais got up and walked out quite stiffly, like a statue, and before I had time to ask him, "Whither go ye?" like Elizire, he was down the staircase, but without breaking his leg. Still, that doesn't let us know how the opera ghost came to ask you for a footstool, insisted Monsieur Moncharmin. Well, from that evening, no one tried to take the ghost's private box from him. The manager gave orders that he was to have it at each performance, and whenever he came, he asked me for a footstool. "Tut, tut! A ghost asking for a footstool! Then this ghost of yours is a woman." "No, the ghost is a man." "How do you know?" "He has a man's voice." "Oh, such a lovely man's voice." "This is what happens. When he comes to the opera, it's usually in the middle of the first act. He gives 3 little taps on the door of the box 5. The first time I heard those 3 taps, when I knew there was no one in the box, you can think how puzzled I was. I opened the door, listened, looked, nobody, and then I heard a voice say, 'Mrs. Jules?' My poor husband's name was Jules. 'A footstool, please.' Saving your presence, gentlemen, it made me feel all overish like—" But the voice went on, "Don't be frightened, Mrs. Jules. I am the opera ghost." And the voice was so soft and kind that I hardly felt frightened. The voice was sitting in the corner chair on the right in the front row. "Was there anyone in the box on the right of the box 5? asked Moncharmin. "No, box 7 and box 3, the one on the left, were both empty. The curtain had only just gone up." "And what did you do?" "Well, I brought the footstool, of course. It wasn't for himself he wanted it, but for his lady. But I never heard or saw of her." What? So now the ghost is married?" The eyes of the 2 managers traveled from Mrs. Giry to the inspector, who, standing behind the box-keeper, was waving his arms to attract their attention. He tapped his forehead with a distressful forefinger to convey his opinion that the widow, Jules Giry, was most certainly mad, a piece of pantomime which confirmed Monsieur Richard in his determination to get rid of an inspector who kept a lunatic in his service. Meanwhile, the worthy lady went on about her ghost, now painting his generosity. At the end of the performance, he always gives me 2 francs, sometimes 5s, sometimes 10 francs, and when he has been many days without coming, only since people have begun to annoy him again, he gives me nothing at all. Excuse me, my good woman, said Moncharmin, while Mrs. Giry tossed the feathers in her dingy hat at this persistent familiarity. Excuse me, how does the ghost manage to give you 2 francs? Why, he leaves them on the little shelf in the box, of course. I find them with the program, which I always give to him. Some evenings I find flowers in the box, a rose that must have dropped from his lady's bodice. For he brings a lady with him sometimes. One day they left a fan behind. Oh, the ghost left a fan, did he? And what did you do with it? Well, I brought it back to the box the next night. Here the inspector's voice raised. You've broken the rules. I shall have to fine you, Mrs. Giry. Hold your tongue, you fool, muttered Monsieur Firmin Richard. You brought back the fan, and then? Well, then they took it away with them, sir. It was not there at the end of the performance, and in its place they left a box of English sweets, which I am very fond of. That's one of the ghost's pretty thoughts. That will do, Mrs. Giry. You can go. When Mrs. Giry had bowed herself out with a dignity that never deserted her, the managers told the inspector that they had decided to dispense with the old madwoman's services, and when he had gone in his turn, they instructed the acting manager to make up the inspector's accounts. Left alone, the managers told each other of the idea which they had both in mind, which was that they should look into the little matter of Box 5 themselves. All right, my friends, that is the end of Chapter 4. I think we will end this for tonight, and we will continue again on Monday. I hope 2026 is beginning in a good and beautiful way for all of you. This has been Indiana Homes. Love to you all. See you next Monday. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.